Welcome to Everyday Ethics, our weekly ethical download from the BBC with me, Roisin Macaulay. On this week's podcast, it's written in the text, from the Book of Revelations to the Quran. Is religion a template for war and discord? That question will be addressed by author and commentator on comparative religions Karen Armstrong in this year's McCosh lecture at Queen's University on Wednesday afternoon. Addressing the question this morning for us on Sunday Sequence, Professor Gordon Campbell from Union Theological College, Michael Nugent from Atheist Ireland, and Dr. Raied Al-Wazzan, a Muslim scientist. You're all very welcome to Sunday Sequence.
Thank you.
If I can begin with you, Gordon. Right, let me just put the question directly. Is religion intrinsically violent?
I would answer no. But in answering no, I would want to ask about the place of violence in human society. I suppose as an academic, I tend to suspect that under most straightforward sounding questions, there are layers of complexity. And in particular, it seems to me that when you raise the question of violence, you are talking about something that, rather like an iceberg, has a visible part to it, but increasingly we seem to understand that in our society there's a lot of violence under the surface. Indeed, one might argue that civilised society is about trying to find ways to deal with that, or at least to counteract violence, or to find ways of replacing violence, whether it be spoken or deed violence. So I would want to subject religion, I suppose, to the same kind of scrutiny in terms of, well, how does it work with what seems to be a virtually universal human phenomenon, which is the resort to violence in certain circumstances. And I guess in a place like Northern Ireland, where violence has been so much part of the visual and visible in 40-odd years of reporting some horrendous violence, that has been a subject that has kind of lived with me as a Belfast born and bred kind of person growing up in the Troubles and finding that violence was a reality in my own life. So in terms of faith and of religion, I find myself reflecting as a Christian, as a Presbyterian, on such things pretty much for all of my life, whether I've been living here or elsewhere. So for me, it's an issue that requires quite a lot of digging underneath the surface. And in the same way that religion for most practitioners is one important aspect of a number of aspects that would make up their lives, so then if you're going to answer the question of violence, whether a person would speak to it as confessing to have been a perpetrator, or perhaps to have been the victim of violence, or merely an observer of it with an opinion about it, their particular religious credentials and their particular religious beliefs will fit into that picture somewhere. That would be the kind of way that I would want to explore what was a very straightforward question. I'm
going to put the same straightforward question now. Is religion inherently violent? To Michael Nugent. Michael?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, and
okay.
I think everyone can.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think it is inherently violent, and in the way that anything that is based on faith and dogma is inherently going to lead to violence. And I would include in that secular ideologies like fascism and Nazism, and I would even include things like, the unregulated free market. Anywhere where you base your opinions on faith, by which I mean believing things disproportionately to the currently best available evidence, and dogma, by which I mean believing things unquestioningly, you're going to have those problems. Now, I think the difficulty with religion is that, unlike secular faiths and dogmas, where eventually they bump into reality and you notice that they're not working and you have to adjust your beliefs, religion hides its testability in an imaginary afterlife. And so it doesn't have the same checks and balances in real life that prevent people from saying, well, no, this is not the correct way to go. So you see things, for example, in, say, the Quran or the Bible, which contain many morally good passages, but they also include things like telling people in the Quran to flog adulterers 100 times each and don't let your compassion stop you. And in Deuteronomy and Samuel in the Bible, the Christian God repeatedly commands the Israelites to attack the cities of other tribes and show them no compassion. And clearly, the reason for that is that there were people at those times that realised that these commands were immoral, and they had to be told, don't let your compassion stop you because you're obeying the creator of the universe. And when you genuinely believe that you're obeying the creator of the universe, that gives you a lot of motivation to do things that ordinarily your natural compassion and empathy and morality would cause you to not do.
Raied, is it then the case that any religion based on divine revelation has a potential for violence because the divine is telling you to do something that perhaps some people don't want to do?
Right. Well, to answer your question, probably I will say no. Every religion, every ideology has been used for their own ends, and they justify the violence to gain more control. Does not only exist in some Islamic group who used violence for their political end. We have groups in Christianity, we have same group in Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and even secular, as some countries who are secular attacked other countries. So there are lots of people has been using religion for their political end. As Gordon said here, there is a violence within the society in general. For example, there is no religion will tell you not to treat your partner well. Okay, but there are lots of people from all walks of life, all religions, are not treating their partner well. If we see a man or a woman not treating their partner well, do we say that man, he is not following his own teaching, or the teaching itself is wrong? I would say no, that man just does not following his own religion. So we don't, if we see a bad Muslim or a bad Christian, we don't say the Islam is wrong or the Christianity is wrong, but that person is not following what his religion telling him. Most of the religion have a very high moral standards, provide people with a moral compass in their own life. But there are some small minority who is using that for their own political end.
But is it not the case that any religion that is, if one might call it, a missionary religion, i.e. that sets out to convert, as all the great monotheistic religions have set out to do in the past, is it not the case that they have looked to a divine inspiration for killing enemies or trying to convert people by violence? Gordon.
I think that once one begins to speak of religion and violence, one has to raise the question of power. And there's no doubt that when anyone has their hands on power, they have potentially the opportunity to coerce. And I think through the history of humanity, one can give all kinds of examples, whether involving religion or not, to show that once someone has power, if the political system in place does not provide checks and balances on that power, then that power can be misused. Of course, we see that in personal lives as well. And one of our guests has referred to the power that one can have in a relationship over a person with whom one lives and spends one's life. The question, though, of scriptures and of writings that inspire was raised by Michael a moment ago. And I think really that is one area which we might gainfully explore, because if you want to say that religion is inherently violent, you're going to have to provide evidence that is the
There's a lot of smiting and smoting in the Bible, and a lot of killing, actually, divinely ordained. And the book of Revelations, but not only that, what about the Canaanites, the Amalekites, and all the people wiped out?
Well, indeed, and there are also in those same books and in that same Deuteronomistic history other viewpoints in the same scriptures. And of course, one has to ask, well, what do readers, be they Jewish or Christian, of these scriptures actually do with them? My own particular expertise is in the area of biblical studies, and it's a normal thing for all students of biblical studies to include in their study today the issue of what one does with what one reads, which is of course not confined to biblical studies, but is part of all art and literary work. It's the ethical imperative, if you like, of what one does with what one knows. Epictetus is one of the famous oldies who spoke about the importance of education, and education is usually taken to be something that enlightens. Well, one is, of course, educated and enlightened by what one reads, what one thinks about, and ultimately what one does with it is the test. And so when, for many years, I lived in France and people said to me, "You're a Protestant, aren't you?" My media keep telling me that Protestants did this and Protestants did that to Catholics in Northern Ireland. Isn't that where you come from? I had to make an attempt to explain a rather complex situation about what people did with what they thought their lives should be involved in, and what element of religion or politics or culture they might use to justify that. And of course that has to do with education, doesn't it? That has to do with experience, that has to do with culture, that has to do with family values and so on. There's a lot of complexity in there. Revelation happens to be my speciality, so I deal a lot with a book that has a purported violence about it, and there is plenty of documentation to support that. Many readers of Revelation find the book to be irredeemably violent. I don't happen to share their view.
Now, I want to take you up on this point that you've made, that it's what people do with the text, with the scripture that mattered. And if you have any form of religion or dogma that depends very heavily on text, perhaps that in itself leads to violence. Michael, you mentioned that it isn't just religious texts. One might bring, communist tracts into this. One can look at writings of Stalin, of Hitler, and Mao in particular. So is it what people do with the text, then, that is the crucial thing?
Well, of course, Hitler was a Roman Catholic and had deals with
the
Vatican.
I don't know that the church would particularly have recognised him, but...
Well, they did. They celebrated his birthday every year until he died, and they never excommunicated him. And one of the first things that Hitler did is he signed a concordat with the Catholic Church. The Vatican also, of course, signed the Lateran Treaty with Mussolini. And so it has made deals with fascists and Nazis. It has also brought us, 2,000 years of blaming the Jews for killing their God, 200 years of crusades against Muslims, 600 years of inquisitions against heretics. And if you look at Islam, it's brought us everything from the massacre of the Jews in Medina after the Battle of the Trench, centuries of atrocities against Hindus in India, and a lot of things that are happening today. So if you want to examine what they're actually doing with the texts and use that as your test, then it is clear that while there are obviously very good moral passages in the Bible and the Quran, there are also passages that encourage people to do things that are morally evil. And that the difficulty is, particularly in Islam, where there's no central theological authority, there is nobody to say which passages and which interpretations are actually revelations from the creator of the universe and which are mistaken. So ISIS are as entitled to say that their version of Islam is the true Islam, as are, say, the Ahmadi Muslim community, who are a very peaceful and moderate and pluralist community, and even the Al-Azhar University, where Pope Francis made his speech the other day, which is one of the most influential Sunni universities, has issued a statement refusing to consider ISIS as apostates, because even they cannot say that ISIS are not acting in the name of Islam.
I'm going to take that question to Raied, but first of all, I feel I should correct you on one thing, Michael, and that is Hitler might never have been excommunicated by name, but as leader of the Nazi Party, he was obviously included in the February 1931 Edict of the Conference of German Bishops, which excommunicated all the leaders and active members of the Nazi Party. Raied, I want to take this question of text to you, which both Gordon and Michael have addressed, and that is there something inherent in the text, because you have some very, very violent fundamentalist Muslims who are justifying their actions by texts in the Quran?
Most of these people, they take the text out of its context. Some of these texts come, for example, on the way of describing the self-defense. Self-defense as well, it's a kind of violence as well, to defend yourself from other people committing violence against you. But if we look at the history, the biggest violence, the biggest war is the First and Second World War. That was not a religious war. That was a secular, that was fighting over power by the superpowers. Even in the recent years, for example, the unjustified war from Britain and US against Iraq, that even has some political dimension when the Bush said this is a crusade, but it's mainly over power. It's over resources. So they're all more secular war than religious war.
Michael, more secular war than religious war? And I mean, Raied has mentioned the First World War, 35 million dead. One could mention 100 million in Russia and China dead, also following the texts of Mao and Stalin.
Yeah, and part of that is because nationalism is very similar to religion in that it is not based on compassion or empathy or reciprocity or fairness or justice. It is based on people identifying with ideologies, whether they be secular or religious. And I've already said that secular ideologies can be as harmful as religious ideologies. The difficulty with religious ideologies in particular is that because they hide their testability in the afterlife, it is harder for them to have the checks and balances that brought an end to the Second World War and the First World War, but religious wars continue indefinitely because of this. And I think what we need to do is we need to go to a secular version of morality based on a combination of compassion and empathy and fairness and justice, and based on trying to identify how a perfectly rational set of people would design principles for a just society, rather than on imaginary revelations that contradict each other. And who knows whether ISIS are being told the correct thing from the creator of the universe, or who knows whether a moderate Muslim is. The difficulty is we cannot tell because there is no objective access. If there was a creator of the universe giving moral messages, you would expect him to give the same message to everybody. But that isn't the case, and so we need an objective, rational measure to try to identify what's likely to be the most moral thing to do.
Now, Michael, they're calling for a secular version of morality. Gordon, do you think religion is the only source of morality?
I think that any human being has within their humanness the capacity to act in a moral and justifiable way. In every civilized society, I think one would want to suggest that there is a role for everyone who wishes to be involved, and depending on the rules of the society in question, to bring to the table their particular commitments. I don't think, in what I've heard Michael say, that there is any hint of a denial that it is for all fair-minded people in Michael's vision of society to come forward. There are plenty of examples, certainly in a Western framework, of religious people with a faith, despite, from what Michael has said, the fundamental problematics of that from his point of view. There are plenty of examples of them coming forward and offering their particular gifts and talents and commitments in society. I'm sure that in an historical framework one can line up, and Michael has lined up some accusations against religious power or religion in league with power, where there has been the ability to coerce and to carry out acts of violence. But as I said at the beginning, there's a lot more to violence than people who claim to be involved in faith. You attempted on a number of occasions to put some statistics to what atheistic communism has been capable of in the 20th century. Presumably that deserves the same kind of scrutiny, although it would perhaps not accept that it is a religion, and it might be difficult to a dogma. Well, yes, perhaps dogma. But then human beings are passionate. One only has to look at something like football, sport. Tackle hard, tackle fair, play hard, play fair. Now, where is violence then going to come in? Well, one has referees and one has rules and so on, and one has training programs, and you're meant to be fit when you tackle hard so that it won't hurt you unduly. So, much better for Ireland and England to face one another, let's say, on a rugby pitch than perhaps what one can imagine in the past. And now, was Ireland facing England on religious grounds? Were the practitioners religious people? Was one side on one side of the army and one on the other? There's a lot of complexity there as well. I think that fair-minded people in democratic societies, simply as citizens, have the opportunity to put forward their particular view. In your own programme a few moments ago, the question was raised as to whether in France, for example, the religious element is part of the political situation and the election. And your commentator said that, of course, for one candidate in the first round, that may have been an option. But basically, because of the privatisation of religion in our context, you have to look to other issues.
Now, it's interesting you talk about religion in our context, in the Western context. I want to put it to Raied that how is it seen? How is religion and the force of religion and missionary religions and so on seen from your part of the world? Because you are originally from Iraq. Yes?
Yes.
So is there a view, for example, that Christians were kind of violent in the Crusades and that it was the West attacking, Islam?
It depends which part of history you're talking about. If you're talking about the Crusade, yes, we still believe that this war, actually we don't call it, if you look at the way we studied the history, we don't call it the Crusade or the Christian War. We called it the French War. The European attacked the Holy Land, because at that time, during the Crusade invasion, there are lots of Arab Christian was fighting with the Muslims to defeat the Crusaders. So they are fighting with the Muslims. And you see, even today, in Palestine situation, the Christian in Palestine are supporting the Arab Muslims against Israel. So from that context, we don't see it as a Christian war. We see it as a powerful country who wants to take the resources. In Iraq, in the Middle East in general, the Arab world, we have a multi-ethnic country. It's mixed. The Christian exists for the last 1400 years. If the Muslims...
But under attack now from a branch of Islam that is very dogmatic and fundamentalist.
Right. You have to look at the religion over the whole its history. In the last 1400 years, if the Muslim or the Quran teach us to kill the Christian, would have been wiped by now. But they still exist. They still protected under all the different shade of Muslim rulers who ruled Middle East for the last 1400 years. Just now they have been attacked by this cult. That doesn't mean all the Muslim religion against them. I personally, when I was in the universities, I have many Christian, Yazidis or other religious minorities studying together, have the same right. We both served in the army, to protecting the country. We have the same right. But since the invasion on Iraq, the American brought the division, the sectarianism.
Oh. Okay, I want to put the question on dogma to Michael, because, is atheism dogmatic?
Not in the slightest. The vast majority of atheists, and every atheist that I know is quite
happy... That's a very dogmatic answer.
is quite happy to say that I might be mistaken about anything that I believe, including whether there's a God. I'm not claiming that there isn't a God. In fact, most atheists, as well as even those who strongly believe that there's no God, are also technically agnostics in that we are happy to say that we don't claim to be able to know that, because ultimately nobody knows. How can we know? So all that we can do is try to identify what route is more likely to bring us closer and closer to the truth. And that route, I think, is things like reason, applying reason to the currently best available evidence, and always being willing to change your mind if you get new evidence. The least reliable ways are faith and revelations from imaginary beings, because the test is that those methods of faith and dogma lead different people to come to very different conclusions about the same reality. Whereas applying reason to reality, including through the scientific method and also through reason, is more reliably leading to different people coming to the same conclusions about the same reality. And so I'm quite happy to say I might be mistaken. Give me evidence and I will change my mind, which is something that a lot of religious people are not prepared to do.
I want to go back to the question of looking at it from a Western viewpoint for a moment, because there is a saying, I believe, in countries that were colonised, they gave us the Bible but took the land. Gordon, would you address that particular question? Sure. Was there an association, a violent association with religion and missionary activity by all religions in countries that were former colonies?
Well, I think that this is well documented. Certainly the Western powers grabbed plenty of land, and the story of colonisation is not a happy one. And that's not restricted to the behaviour of Western colonial powers. I think, as has been said already, you look at history as you wish, but there is plenty of it to look at. And right throughout human history, those who have a particular ideology for their own life and times have wanted to export it, and that's no different in the case that you raise. And certainly the colonial powers had some kind of nominal Christianity about them anyway, and they tended to bring with them the representatives of organised religion, and there were frameworks and contexts to allow that to happen. Now, I think most commentators would accept that missionary activity was a mixed blessing. Indeed, there are many faith communities that were born of the missionary zeal, if you like, or the sharing of a particular faith view, which led to the creation of communities that themselves espouse that. They have tended to work with the scriptures, and they have said, now, let's read this from a post-colonial point of view.
I'm going to have a very quick last word from our Muslim guest, Raied, please.
Well, all the religion give a moral compass to their followers. Most religions tell people how to behave in their lives. It's very hard to legislate it and have a moral, civil legislation. For example, all the religion teach you of be kind and pay to a charity. How do you legislate for that? It's difficult. So it's only the religion encourage people to donate to the charity. So religion is the moral compass for many, many people.
Thank you all very much indeed, Raied, Gordon and Michael. You've been listening to Everyday Ethics from the BBC with me, Roisin McCauley. You'll find more details on the BBC website.